As a change agent in economic and social justice for over 45 years, I knew stories of resilience, well-being, and prosperity were taking root on reservations and in cities all across this land.
It was always about the greater good. It was always about what's best for the whole nation, what's best for the earth, and not what's best for the individual.
Our focus is around our unhoused relatives. So when I talk about unhoused relatives, I talk about unhoused people, not just people of color, all people. Our unhoused relatives don't need more policing, right? We don't need for the city and for the police to criminalize poverty. We need connection. We need relationality. We need those relationships. We need to be a community and take care of each other.
The foundation of our school is wodakuye. That's our kinship system. And all of our kids here, we refer to each other by relative terms. That means that we're good to each other, we look out for each other, and we take care of each other. And every day that we remind them that, but that isn't just us, it's everything. We take care of the earth, we take care of the plants, the animals, and our things that we have because they come from the earth.
Our relationship is with the land and with plants and animal relatives, knowing that we aren't, above them. We are kind of on the same level as them, that we're all sharing this one earth. And so we're all connected in that way, whether, it's a stranger on the street or, an ant crawling on the ground, we're all connected.
When we emerged through a series of events, some of us became human and some of us became buffalo. And so when we talk about buffalo, when we talk about Khatkanka, we're really talking about our relatives, our other selves, because we come from the same root. We come from the same ancestor. And so there really is no difference between Lakota people and buffalo people.
White nationalist mentality about power and what that perception of power is. And it is under those auspices of power, perceived power, whether it was from the Catholic Church or from the United States government, that our communities, that our peoples were nearly annihilated or exterminated by the colonizer.
One of the most pivotal movements that pushed us to where we're at was the implementation around early 1900, 1910, 1915, was the federal government, along with the help with different churches, different denominations, came to our reservation with the sole mission to educate our children in Western settler colonial education in English.
They had Bureau of Indian Affairs schools, church missionary schools, and public schools, but there were no Indian parents on the school board. No Indian parents deciding curriculum. No Indian parents selecting teachers that were going to be in their classroom with their child, forming their child's curiosity and future. And anywhere else in the United States, they had parent-teacher associations, and you had the parents on the school boards. We were denied that voice in the education and the future, therefore, of our children.
You fast forward, there's still 28 schools on our reservation. Every one of them have instruction in English first. Everything that's involved in that school reflect settler Western colonialism. So that was a moment in our history that has impacted us and is still impacting us now.
At one time, in 1800, we had 60 million plus buffalo in the Great Plains area. They were vast, they were abundant, and they were the lifeblood for the people that lived in this part of the world. Through very specific policies, there was an intentional effort by the government to wipe out the buffalo. The reason was buffalo were everything to us. They were our economy. They were our source of food, shelter, clothing, spiritual items. And people understood that if the buffalo were taken away, that our ability to be self-sufficient would no longer exist, and we would be forced to come on to reservations and be forced to be reliant upon the government. And so there was a very specific effort. And what happened is that by 1900, there were less than 1,000 free roaming buffalo. We went from 60 million plus to less than 1,000 in 100 years.
Indigenous people own 5% of this country's land base. Globally, indigenous people own 28% of the Earth's land surface. The amount of resources, and 80% of the biodiversity is on our land. We should be the richest people around by economic law. So what is this if it's not the fact that our assets are taken, converted into cash for them, or the benefit of the asset is derived and directed to them? We might still own the Colorado River, but they've diverted the water. You know, so we were looking at every point how our assets were used to make them wealthy.
We really believe, and I really believe, that what we have to be working for is a balance in all things, in the way we think, in the way we act, in our relationships to one another and the earth. And so that's what we're actively fighting for here, is a restoration of that balance.
One of the central components of our work is what we call 7Gen, or we chonchage shakomi. And for us, as Indigenous people, 7 generations is something that probably all Indigenous people share. But for us as Sichangu Lakota, it is very deep and very specific. For us, the process is really simple: is act in the best interests of your great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. It is make moral and ethical decisions that place the good of the group, above the good of the individual. And finally, it is make decisions using complex, and finally, it's make decisions using complex decision models.
So our 7Gen vision really started off with the idea of what kind of world we want to see in the next 7 generations. And for us, I think we've always wanted to have community input first. And so we started off by doing like community roundtables and did like vision exercises with people to see like what did people want to see. And that's actually how the Food Sovereignty Initiative program started, was from community input. People wanted to see more local food access, more community gardens and greenhouses. And so that's kind of how we started the program off. But I think for us, we wanted to see what the community looked like in terms of, our greatest threat right now is social inequality and climate change. And so what do we need to be doing differently in order to make sure we have a vibrant and thriving world for the next 7 generations? And we've kind of talked about generations being about 25 to 30 years, and so we're having to think 175 years into the future, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. I think a lot of people are kind of thinking about maybe the next 10, maybe just at least 1 generation. And so I think for us, we're thinking about, what does energy look like for us? What does our housing look like? What does education look like? Where are we getting our food from? And so we're trying to think of all these questions that we might have to ask ourselves in the community.
I grew up here on the reservation. My first experience with formal education was in a tribal school here, Little Wound School. And I'm always proud to share that, because there's a stigma, there are stereotypes about reservation education systems. I was able to go on to Stanford University to get my engineering degree. I went on to law school and got my Juris Doctor in concentration in human rights law. And then I have a master's degree from our tribal college in Lakota leadership and management, and my educational roots are in a tribal school. I'm privileged enough to have access to these various experiences and go various places, always knowing that it is my responsibility to come back and help my people. I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother. My son has a 2-year-old daughter, so I am a grandmother. And knowing that my descendants are going to be here generations from now, and that may seem kind of selfish, but I wanna make sure that they have a good life, that I'm doing what I can now to make the next generations a bit better, you know, so that they don't have to struggle as much, so that they're not just surviving, that they're you know, living good lives, and they know who they are as Lakota people, and that they're still maintaining our way of life.
For me, growing up here, I experienced things that we didn't have currently. So I grew up not having a farmer's market. I grew up not seeing people really produce their own food. I grew up, we're not really, you know, eating buffalo or knowing the wild foods. I was living in Arizona at the time in 2018, and I was really seeing a lot of cool things happening here in the community with, you know, community buffalo harvest, more young people going out and learning about wild foods and eating them and making, you know, the medicinal plants into medicines. And there was just something about that like really called to me, like my spirit was just telling me I need to get home, I need to be part of this.
This huge language that everybody's talking. Almost every person that came to the house of my mother's or my grandmother's was speaking the language. And at that time, you know, in 1979, I'm born, so it's a little after, you know, Civil Rights Act. And you'd think at that time, I should have been able to go to school with my braids.
It was important. It was an important time for me to have with Grandpa. It seemed to just be the way that we spent our time together, was on long walks. And sometimes in long sitting. We would walk a while and then sit down, and he would take his pocket knife off and whittle something. He never whittled anything like a figure. He just would whittle the stick down till there wasn't any stick anymore. But that's how we'd spend our times. And that's what I carried back with me. No matter what, I could actually call up that feeling of sitting in the woods with Grandpa. It was an ability for me to center and to calm myself. I already knew that the economic models we were looking at carried their own values, and that our values were different, and that culture was our strength, not our weakness. Because this was back in the days where everybody knew Indians couldn't do business because we shared too much and we cooperated. It seemed to me like those were good things, and that businesses could be successful by sharing and cooperating. Indian man that was getting his master's degree in economic development, and I started talking to him, and he created this informal sector study, and he went out and basically the question was, what do you do to make money? And he began looking at 83% of the households earned about 87% of their income from these informal activities. They made coffins for the cemetery, they welded crosses for the cemetery, they mended fences, they did hair, they babysat, they sold lunches to the Indian Health Service or the Bureau of Indian Affairs people. There was 118 vibrant activities that were being done every day to make money. And I was like, that's it. That's it. And it was just all there, all of it in front of us, all this creativity, entrepreneurship. They needed, in some cases, very small loans, $500 loans, $2,000 loans. Really and truly is the story behind the Lakota Fund.
There's always been that underground economy, but in some ways with the formation of Lakota funds and providing that access to business loan capital, it kind of formalized us. Lakota Funds has been doing a lot in the last 35 years. You know, I think we've deployed it up to like 15 million, which sounds like a drop in the bucket. I give you that, you know, but $15 million in business loan capital and assisted with the creation or expansion of like 1,200 businesses over 35 years. It's still, there's a lot of that underground cash economy that still exists. Until Lakota Federal Credit Union was chartered, there was not a single bank, federally insured financial institution depository on the Pine Ridge Reservation.
A part of our school's mission is to really develop a strong cultural identity And so we really nurture their nagi, their spirit. And from what we're hearing from parents at parent-teacher conferences, from our parent engagement nights, is that they go home and they're teaching what they learn here to their siblings, to their parents. And I think we've heard so many times from parents that that is very healing for them. It's healing for their family to, to learn those things that they didn't know.
We're going to speak our language, and we're also going to learn, our academics, and we're going to learn our social skills, so that way we sustain our fluency. But we also start to take back our space. We start to take back our space that always had belonged to us. We sustain it. We sustain our language like we are, that we'll always be wealthy.
I'm the cook. I cook the breakfast and lunch here for the school. And with my Indigenous food sovereignty background, I try to bridge the two together and introduce the concept of a native farm to school here for the reservation. It's big across Indian country, but here it's not really been introduced yet. So we're trying to do that, and bringing in our wild meats, buffalo, deer, elk, antelope. What else have we had here? Buffalo berries, currants, plums, different teas.
So the children are able to go out, maybe part of science class, and they can harvest traditional medicines that not only are they being able to identify them, but they can bring them back into the school, and instead of being given a Tylenol or some Pepto-Bismol when they don't feel good, they're able to use these medicines that we've used for thousands of years before we turn to pharmaceutical medicines. We still have to meet state standards to be qualified as a school. So testing-wise, they're in all of their things, reading, math, science, they're all testing at least one grade level ahead, which is amazing. But it all comes back to what they're learning.
So we're here at Kewakbal Gardens, which is a 1 acre teaching and production farm. So we do a lot of mixed vegetable production. We do a lot of egg production as well. We have some hens out here. And our goal was originally to teach the community how to grow their own food. And so over the years, we've kind of scaled up from doing like raised bed gardening to full rows, and just to increase our food production, because we know there's people here in our community who are hungry today, and so having to balance the needs of like people are hungry now, but also trying to create systems that are more sustainable and more future thinking. And so the way we do that is to increase local food access, is to increase the amount of tribal food producers. And so we've started a farmer training program, really geared at getting people ready to start their own food production. So that is an 8-month program where we recruit community members to join us for the 8 months and really get all the experience and hands-on knowledge that they could use for starting food production.
And I feel like it's molded me, and it's taught me so many things, not only about myself, but about working with other people, just having that human experience and walking this journey with them a little bit. I mean, I feel like I've grown so much just being in the garden.
Being able to be out here in this place, in this space, was definitely healing. It definitely changed my perspective on everything.
Regenerative agriculture is approaching food systems and food production from the point of longevity, of being able to be adaptable and not working against the land and nature, but actually being a part of it, working within it. So we can have the longest run of success, not just for ourselves who are producing food and implementing the food systems, but for the land itself, that the land is also being provided with benefits from our practices on the land. So when we integrate animals, here on the site we utilize our poultry paddock system. We roughly run 500 birds, all egg layers, on 1.5 acres. And it was a system that we had borrowed from Minnesota, from a Minnesota program. And we instituted it here. And so we use a traditional canopy of shrubs, which is our buffalo berries, choke cherries, plums, in the paddocks, but we also give the birds that natural forage to go off of. And so it's much part of a system in terms of taking what they need in terms of food, the birds, but then also providing eggs in the most sustainable way possible.
So, the Lakota Regenerative Buffalo Range is a 28,000 acre buffalo range that will be home to 1,500 animals that will be able to produce between 300 and 400 surplus buffalo per year. At 28,000 acres and 1,500 buffalo, it will be the largest Native American owned and managed buffalo herd in the world.
What happened to indigenous people here on this land base in Turtle Island, the genocide of our people, is America as a government's original sin. And until that's fully acknowledged and reparations are made and land is given back to us to steward, there can be no true healing. Reparations definitely includes land, returning land, honoring the treaties, and recognizing those original land boundaries that were established in those treaties.
Working with those communities that were, exploited and extracted from, seeing ways that you can support, whether that be through monetary or whether that be through amplification or technical assistance. I think for us, a lot of times, we're learning as we go, and so a lot of times funding is very helpful, but I think technical assistance is just as great, teaching us how to do different skills. I also think that could look like by just getting us connected to other funder groups. A lot of times people might not be able to support us financially, but they'll also connect us to their funders or their partners. And so it also looks like partnerships as well, I would say. I would say real authentic partnerships, and that can look like, for us, when we have some really great partners, it's really been, instead of writing grant reports, some of our reporting involved like them coming and doing a site visit with us to be able to get to know us better and get to know the community and see the actual impact that we're trying to do. So those are just some examples. So as I previously said with, I think the world right now is kind of rushing towards trying to kind of co-opt what is regenerative agriculture, or even define what that is. And so I just want to urge people throughout the world to make sure we're inviting diverse voices, including indigenous voices. It's not so much just being able to hear us, but it's also so much to making sure that we're considered leaders in this work.
My vision is that we're going to have a whole bunch of change makers, coming about from the school as they see and learn from a different lens. Because growing up, I didn't see myself. I didn't see my people's history.
The ultimate goal is to get our kids to be intermediate fluent in Lakota.
I'm privileged to be healthy, I want everyone to be healthy, right? That should be a mission for everyone. Our wealth is really determined by our health.
I can't hammer home enough the approach that we're taking, like with not just Thunder Valley, but in the food sovereignty movement overall on the reservation, that concept of being a good relative, not just to one another, but to the land and producing our foods. I think that definitely needs to be, and it is, but I think it can always be improved upon and brought more forward to
the transformation that we're trying to effectuate in our community really is this transformation of healing to hope to liberation. Because once you start on your healing journey, you're able to heal from historical traumas, from existing traumas, ongoing traumas. You're able to find hope again, hope that life can be better, that life can be different. You can start to dream again, envision about the possibilities. And that's when you start to transform your mindsets to this liberated way of living. And so that's the transformation that we're doing